is the founding meeting, the one that you were talking about in Stockholm? Was it your friends? How did that come together?
Well, the part of it was, of course, simply the contact that existed between the student leadership, which were run, the local student body president and the staff, and the business schools were actually independent organizations at that time, so they were not part of a university. So it was kind of a total entity in its own right, and so that meant that the student body was likewise an entity in its own right. And so, based on the arrangements through praxis, there was the kinds of contacts going on that had to do with jobs, language, and we also had exchange for purposes of simply learning table manners. This whole question of you get yourself in front of a fully established table with 4 glasses and 5 sets of knives and forks. So what will you do? Well, we had that as part of our kind of preparatory base for a good business student. And so when we did our touring around the Scandinavian countries, it was always combined with formal dinners and formal arrangements, which provided a little bit of extra in terms of becoming professional. Now, so in the 1948, that was just an informal kind of an arrangement, that it was a preliminary discussion. The 1949 was then really now the formal delegate coming from a student body with authorization to actually become involved in an organization called ISEC and be a part of that. But any other details I've totally forgotten. But we had again, the leadership was from Sweden, and I always appreciated that at the time we had a very good president of the Swedish business school in Stockholm, and the president here was what the heck was that was we had that was Kjell Markusson, and his name is one that I sort of remember, that he was kind of a real driving force. But he had, in addition, as part of the delegation, he had somebody named Åke Hagström as his second in command. And this was then a meeting that was done March 3 and 4th, 1949, with the delegates from Sweden, Belgium, Denmark, Finland, France, Holland, Norway, and Switzerland. So that was the founding group, now officially establishing ISEC as the organization.
How were you impacted by World War II, and how do you think World War II impacted this founding meeting?
Well, it was the notion of coming out of isolation, not having really had any contact with anybody else for close to 5 years. And that's why it had some real importance to try to re-establish this ability to gain access to job opportunities, get the language competence and so on. And then for the first exchange, when we carried the jobs in our pockets and sat down and just said, okay, what you got? And so the president of ISEC at that time, this was April 21, 22 in 1950, was Bengt Sjöstrand. And a real driver was a general delegate from France, Maury, M-A-U-R-Y. And the interesting thing was my sister had a period in Stockholm, And I don't know how, but they happen, you know, you get a horizontal layer where people keep churning. And sure enough, he and my sister got to know each other. And I couldn't believe it when she wrote and said, hey, I've met your friend Maury. And so that exchange had present representatives for France, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Holland, Belgium, Italy, Norway, and Germany. And it was essentially run by the French business schools. So that's why Maury was the important one, and that's what, in a way, also had created the acronym of ISEC. Association internationale des étudiants en sciences économiques et commerciales. Which of course is a real threshold, you know.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like my business school in Finland, which is Svenska Handelshögskolan i Helsingfors. But it was always referred to as Hanken. Well, they finally decided, well, so be it, it is Hanken. And then it's only sort of as a further explanation, if you want to know anything more, it is Svenska Handelshögskolan.
Yeah.
How was the initial idea of ISEC received by governments coming out of this isolation? Was it pretty openly accepted to have international students come into work, or?
Well, you know, this was very interesting that like France in particular was of course a very sensitive one, because they had very high requirements before they were willing to give a work permit. And so I remember sitting outside bureaucratic offices waiting to get the right kind of a paper with the right kind of a stamp and so on. But I think what you find is that once students are involved and it is legitimate, that students get a very good hearing. Whether it is visiting presidents of companies who got their own kids who never talk with them, and so here is a chance to have an ISEC student who really is a student and ask him, so what is it like today to be a student? What do you think about? And as a result, the most amazing doors are open when you say you are a student. I remember sitting in the living room, and then I hear my little guy calling somebody, and then I hear him say, I'd like to speak with the president of Honeywell. Well, then there was a little more discussion. Well, I just wanted to talk with him. Well, okay. Then he got the president apparently, and he said, I would need a drive wheel from your organization here in Seattle, because I'm writing a paper at my school, and I wonder if I could pick one up. And the president, yeah, you can do that. And so it is that kind of a door opener that this notion of student has with it. And in most cases, I think it's very strange for a student to be told that he's going to sell ISEC to the president of this company. You know, you have to overcome all of the thresholds that say, well, I don't know enough to be representing neither my family nor myself nor ISEC, and I'm supposed to sell ISEC to this guy who is the president of this organization. But he is just completely interested in, and if you have asked for 15 minutes, the likelihood is that you will start wondering, how will I get out of here, because I've been here now for an hour. So I think that has been the general reaction to students who have been interested in gaining a hearing. And so as a result, just like France, the US has had a separate visa for ISEC trainees, which therefore gave, like Microsoft, the opportunity to get a strong representation of potential students that would represent them abroad, which came under a different visa than otherwise would have had a lot of rigmarole in order to do that.
Aside from personal goals of either getting work experience abroad or other benefits that you could get out of ISEC, what were some overall goals that the founders really wanted to achieve by giving students this opportunity?
Well, I'm not necessarily representing those who were my colleagues at the time, but I have this notion that we were probably pretty instrumentally turned on, that we needed to get internships abroad, we needed to get doors to open up for us, to have temporary periods of work experience, and with that to get the language exposure. I don't think we at the beginning had kind of these big things in mind. But say by 1966, when we had the big conference in Lausanne, that was a huge conference with very important people present. And actually at the time I had the opportunity to travel with representatives of the Ford Foundation, because they were just in the process of thinking about a business school in Brussels. Because again, a business school for Western Europe was a little special kind of a creature, in the sense of application oriented and oriented towards more of an international view than a local view. So I think that as always, the beginning may have one objective, one goal, and then the leadership changes, the membership changes. There are other things happening in the environment which are having an impact, and as a result you change in response to that. I just came back from Duke University in Durham in North Carolina, and we were essentially meeting on the topic of what should business education look like in the future, given the fact that so far much of the concerns have been internal to business. You know, what's going to happen inside the business organization. Now all the changes are actually in the external environment, impacting on the business organization. Therefore, in what way do business organizations need to respond differently than they have? So, always this continuous change.
Mm-hmm. Since you've seen kind of the progression of how ISEC has changed and how much it's expanded, I mean, it's present in 107 countries with 50,000 members. I mean, that's pretty different than just in 5 to 10 countries in Europe. That's a huge impact.
Right.
How do you see that? That has either been changed for good, or what? How do you see that progression going on?
Well, I still always have been prejudiced for thinking of the ISEC chapter as being a very friendly group. One where you have a chance at a small group with a common interest base that can have a mutually acceptable type of existence, with the support for trainees coming from other countries to be local, and for our students to go to other countries. And that with that goes this notion of having fun, in addition to turning into the seriousness of somebody actually getting prepared to go abroad. And there was a period in the 60s when we actually interviewed every student who was going to go abroad, in order to make sure that that student seemed like a good representative for us, and therefore should be aware of the importance that goes with being a trainee of ISEC. So I think this combination of fun, a social type of organization, but at the same time a degree of seriousness, and part of the seriousness also maybe becoming organizationally a strong kind of vehicle for what ISEC tries to achieve. And I think that's kind of been an underlying type of life that's kept ISEC continuing an interesting organization.
So how long were you an active member, or do you consider yourself an active member?
Well, I still am. Because